She was 7 years old, standing on a sidewalk in Santa Monica, California, violin tucked under her chin, eyes closed, playing like the noise and the crowds and the ocean breeze didn't exist. A stranger stopped walking, pulled out a phone, hit record. That video hit 100 million views. Then came the managers, the contracts, the brand deals, the world tours. By 14, Karolina Protsenko had more YouTube subscribers than most major news networks. Her face was on billboards. Her music was in commercials. She was, by every measurable standard, a success story. But somewhere between that Santa Monica sidewalk and the stadium stage, something shifted. The girl in the videos started looking different, sounding different, and the people who had been closest to her, the early collaborators, the fellow musicians, the people who knew her before the cameras were always rolling, they stopped appearing, one by one, without explanation. This is not a story about talent. She had that from the beginning. This is a story about what happens after the world decides it owns you. The date was sometime in 2018. The location was the 3rd Street Promenade in Santa Monica, a long, open-air stretch of shops and restaurants where street performers had been setting up for decades. It was a normal spot for musicians, guitarists, drummers on buckets, the occasional saxophone player working through jazz standards. Nobody expected a 7-year-old to stop traffic. Karolina Protsenko wasn't there for fun. Her family had emigrated from Ukraine and money was tight. Her father, Dmitry Protsenko, wasn't a music industry professional. He wasn't a manager or a promoter. He was a parent who understood that his daughter had a skill, and that skill could help the family. So he set her up on that sidewalk with her violin case open at her feet. What most people watching that first video didn't know, and what the algorithm never told them, was that Karolina had been training since she was 4 years old. Structured, classical instruction. Not YouTube tutorials, not casual weekend lessons, real disciplined practice. By the time she stood on that promenade at 7, she had 3 years of serious training behind her. That matters, because the video didn't go viral because she was a child playing violin. It went viral because she was playing better than most adults. That contrast, a small girl in a casual outdoor setting performing at a near-professional level, triggered something hardwired in the human brain. We are built to notice things that don't belong. A concert-level violinist in a space built for spare change doesn't compute. So people stopped, stared, filmed, shared. Dmitry held the phone that day. He uploaded the video himself. There was no publicist, no media strategy, no carefully timed release. The family had no blueprint for what was about to happen. Within days, the video spread from Facebook to YouTube. Then international entertainment pages picked it up. Then news outlets, the BBC, local stations across the United States. By the time the view counter cleared 10 million, journalists were calling the family home. Here's a number that puts it in scale. Karolina's YouTube channel went from 0 to over 1 million subscribers in under 12 months. Most musicians spend entire careers chasing that number. Dmitry responded to the attention the way most parents would. He tried to manage it himself. He became the de facto producer, camera operator, channel manager, and booking coordinator for his 7-year-old daughter. He uploaded the videos. He responded to inquiries. He built the schedule. He was, from the very beginning, the person between Karolina and the world. Most people watching those first videos assumed she was homeless. A child playing for survival, not by choice. She wasn't. But the assumption traveled faster than the correction. And that assumption, that rawness, that perceived desperation, was a significant part of why people clicked. Here's the question worth sitting with. Does it change how you felt watching that first video, knowing her family wasn't destitute, just making ends meet? Drop your honest answer in the comments. Because that question gets at something real about why we watch what we watch. Within 6 months of that first video, the inquiries had grown into something Dmitry couldn't manage alone from a kitchen table. Event organizers wanted bookings, brands wanted partnerships, media outlets wanted interviews. The channel was generating real revenue. The family faced a choice. A quiet, private choice that never made headlines. Keep Karolina in a normal school, with normal friendships, with normal afternoons, or step fully into the machine that was now running at full speed. They chose the machine, and that choice had a cost that nobody talked about publicly, not then and barely since. The choice was made, and almost immediately everything changed. Not slowly, not gradually. The shift happened fast, the way it always does when real money enters a creative space. Go back and watch the earliest Karolina videos from 2018. The camera is handheld. The audio is whatever the phone microphone picked up. The lighting is whatever the California sun was doing that afternoon. There are no titles, no color grading, no branded thumbnails, just a girl, a violin, and a sidewalk. Now, watch a video from 2020. The camera is stabilized. The audio is clean. The thumbnails follow a deliberate visual formula, Karolina-centered, bright colors, large expressive text, her face always at a specific angle. The upload schedule is consistent. The titles are search-optimized. The descriptions have timestamps and affiliate links. That transformation didn't happen because a 7-year-old developed a passion for content strategy. It happened because someone was studying what worked, testing what drove clicks, building a system. By 2020, the Karolina Protsenko YouTube channel wasn't a hobby project. It was a business. Ad revenue from hundreds of millions of views. A merchandise line. Paid performance bookings at private events, festivals, and corporate functions. Brand sponsorships integrated directly into videos. A parallel Instagram account with hundreds of thousands of followers. A TikTok presence timed to catch the platform's explosive growth. This was not one revenue stream. It was 5 or 6 running simultaneously, all feeding from the same source, a child with a violin. Dmitry Protsenko gave interviews during this period. Watch them carefully. Listen to the specific words he chooses. He says our channel. He says we decided. He says our audience. The language is always collective, always managerial. It's the language of a CEO describing a company, not a father describing his daughter's passion project. When Karolina herself speaks in those same interviews, the contrast is sharp. Her answers are brief, polished. She says she loves music. She says she loves performing. She smiles at the right moments. But the energy she carries on stage, that alive, fluid, spontaneous energy, it's mostly absent when she's answering questions off the instrument. She sounds like someone who has been told what to say often enough that saying it has become automatic. That pattern has a name. Child performers across decades have shown it. Macaulay Culkin described it. Britney Spears' conservatorship documents detailed a version of it. Even Danny Bonaduce, decades later, talked about being a product before he was a person. The specific details differ. The structural shape is almost always the same. A child generates revenue, adults build infrastructure around that revenue, and the child learns to perform not just on stage, but in every room they enter. Now, this does not mean Karolina was being harmed. That conclusion would be irresponsible without evidence. But California law exists precisely because this pattern is well documented. The Coogan Law, formerly the California Child Actors Bill, was passed in 1939 after Jackie Coogan, one of the biggest child stars in Hollywood history, discovered at age 21 that his parents had spent virtually all of his earnings. The law requires that 15% of a minor performer's gross earnings be set aside in a protected trust account that the parents cannot access. The question, and it is only a question, not an accusation, is whether that protection was properly structured around Karolina's earnings from the beginning. Public records on this are limited. No legal filings have surfaced publicly suggesting a violation. But no public confirmation of compliance exists either. That gap is worth noting, not because wrongdoing is assumed, but because transparency in these situations protects everyone, including the family. By the time Karolina Protsenko turned 10 years old in 2021, she had performed on stages across 3 continents: Europe, North America, the Middle East. She had shared screens with established musicians. She had played venues that adult performers spend years trying to access. But something else was happening quietly in the background of all that success. The people who had been there at the beginning, the fellow street musicians from the Santa Monica Promenade, the early collaborators who had appeared in those first raw videos, the event organizers who had booked her before she was famous, they were gone. Not just from her life, from her content, from her comment replies, from any public record of association. One by one, they disappeared. Nobody announced it. Nobody explained it. They were simply no longer there. And when you go back through the archive looking for them, you start to notice exactly when each one vanished. And the timing in almost every case lines up with a specific moment in the channel's growth. In the early videos, there were other people. That's the detail most casual viewers missed. Go back to 2018 and 2019, the first wave of content from the Santa Monica Promenade and the surrounding area. Karolina wasn't always alone. There were other street musicians in the frame, a guitarist who played alongside her in at least 3 separate videos, a young drummer who appeared in the background of a session that got shared widely across music forums, community event footage where she performed alongside other local acts, surrounded by organizers and families who clearly knew the Protsenko family personally. These people had names. They had their own social media pages, and for a brief window, roughly 2018 to early 2020, some of them posted about Karolina, tagged the family, shared the videos, left comments like "so proud of this girl," and "we were there that day." Then they stopped, not all at once, gradually, but consistently. The guitarist's last public interaction with the channel was in March 2020. The community event organizers who had featured her stopped mentioning her entirely by mid-2020. A children's music educator who had publicly praised her early development deleted several posts referencing Karolina sometime in late 2020. The posts are gone, but archived comment threads reference them. None of these people made public statements about why they went quiet. No falling out was announced. No drama surfaced. They simply withdrew from the orbit, and the orbit closed around the gap they left. This is not unusual in the entertainment industry. It has a name: controlled association management. As a talent's brand grows and becomes commercially valuable, the people around that talent are increasingly filtered. Not always maliciously. Sometimes it's legal NDAs and partnership agreements that restrict what collaborators can say publicly. Sometimes it's strategic, a brand consultant advising that certain associations dilute the image. Sometimes it's purely logistical. The talent is simply too busy, too scheduled, too managed to maintain casual relationships from an earlier chapter of their life. But here's what controlled association management always produces, regardless of the intention behind it: isolation. The person at the center of the brand loses access to people who knew them before the brand existed. The casual friendships, the peers who treat them normally, the collaborators who had no financial stake in the relationship. Those connections are replaced, if they're replaced at all, with professionals, managers, coaches, camera crews, people who are in one way or another on the payroll. In interviews from 2021 and 2022, Karolina was asked about school and friendships. Her answers were careful. She mentioned being homeschooled. She talked about music being her main focus. She said she had friends but didn't name them or describe specific experiences the way teenagers typically do when talking about people they're close to. The answers were technically responsive. They just didn't contain anything real. Meanwhile, her content from that same period showed no peers, no friends appearing in vlogs. The videos were performances, travel footage, and family appearances. Controlled, clean, consistent. The gap between what she said and what was visible was not a small one. This channel exists to examine exactly that kind of gap, the space between the public narrative and the documented reality. Mainstream media covered Karolina's milestones, the viral moments, the performance achievements. Nobody went back through the archive and mapped what disappeared. If that kind of investigation is what you're here for, the subscription button is right there. This is what gets researched here every single week. Because what came next wasn't found by journalists, it was found by the audience. Millions of comments, thousands of threads, viewers who had been watching since 2018 and started noticing, and then started writing down what they were seeing. Most of it was noise, fan enthusiasm, the occasional overheated conspiracy theory that went nowhere. But buried inside that volume was a pattern, a specific, recurring observation that appeared independently across dozens of comment sections on multiple platforms over several years. And eventually, just once, in a single video that most people missed, Karolina Protsenko acknowledged it. Then the topic was never raised again. The comments didn't start as criticism. They started as concern. That's an important distinction. The people who began flagging these patterns weren't trolls looking for controversy. They were long-term viewers, people who had been watching since the Santa Monica sidewalk days, and they were noticing something they couldn't quite name, but couldn't stop seeing either. The first thread emerged around 2021. It showed up independently across YouTube comment sections, Reddit threads, and TikTok replies. The observation was specific and consistent. Karolina's face changed depending on whether she was holding the violin. During performances, even casual ones, even short clips filmed in a car or a hotel room, her expression was open, fluid. There was a particular kind of looseness around her eyes when she played, the kind that doesn't come from training, but from genuine absorption in something. Viewers who had watched hundreds of hours of her content recognized it immediately. Then the camera would cut. She'd lower the violin. Someone would ask her a question about her day, about a trip, about what she thought of a city she'd just performed in. And the looseness disappeared. What replaced it was careful, measured. The smile was still there, but it sat differently on her face. Controlled rather than spontaneous. Hundreds of comments across dozens of videos said some version of the same thing. She looks so happy when she plays, but the second she stops, it's like a light goes off. Has anyone else noticed she seems uncomfortable in the talking parts? The real Karolina is only there when the music is. The second thread was about her life outside the camera. By 2022, Karolina was 11 years old. Viewers started asking, where are her friends? Where are the normal kid moments? Other family-oriented YouTube channels from that era showed children in school plays, birthday parties, sleepovers, arguments with siblings over the television remote. The texture of an actual childhood. Karolina's content had none of that texture. It had performances, travel, and family dinners that felt staged. When she mentioned other kids her age, it was vague, general. No names, no stories, no evidence of a social world that existed outside the brand. The third thread was the most sensitive, and the comments that raised it were noticeably more careful in how they phrased things. Viewers began documenting Dimitri's behavior in family vlogs. Not dramatically, they were specific. In multiple videos from 2021 and 2022, when Karolina gave an answer that seemed to go slightly off script, Dimitri's response, a look, a redirect, a quick subject change, was visible on camera. Commenters time-stamped these moments, shared them across platforms, built a catalog of small instances that individually meant almost nothing, but collectively formed something worth examining. None of this is proof of anything. Parental redirection in film content is common. Managed answers are standard in family channels that generate income. The pattern these viewers identified could reflect a controlling environment. It could also reflect a father who was deeply conscious of what his family shared publicly for completely reasonable protective reasons. What matters is that the audience was watching carefully. And eventually, Karolina responded. In a video from late 2022, a casual, relatively unproduced clip compared to the channel's usual output, she addressed the comments directly. She said she was happy. She said she loved what she did. She said the concern, while kind, wasn't necessary. What she didn't say was more revealing than what she did. She didn't describe a specific moment of joy from the past month. She didn't mention a friend by name. She didn't push back with the irritated energy of a teenager who genuinely felt the criticism was ridiculous. The response was composed, gracious, and completely sealed. No opening, No vulnerability. No detail that felt unplanned. But here's what's also true, and this part matters just as much. There are moments in Karolina's content, scattered across the archive, that are clearly real. A performance in 2022 where she improvised a transition between two pieces and then laughed at herself. A genuine surprised laugh, like she hadn't planned it and found it funny. A backstage clip where she's talking to a sound engineer and completely forgets the camera is there. And for about 40 seconds, she's just a kid asking questions about equipment because she's genuinely curious. These moments exist. They're not common, but they're there, and they matter. Because they're evidence that behind the brand, behind the managed answers and the controlled content, there is still a person. Still present. Still capable of being caught off guard by her own joy. Most of us have had a moment where something we loved started to feel like an obligation, where the thing that made us happy became the thing we had to do because other people were depending on it, because the schedule demanded it, because stopping felt more frightening than continuing. If you felt that even for a moment, even in something much smaller than this, then you already understand what the story is really about. It's not about YouTube. It's about what happens to the thing inside you that made you good at something when the world starts treating that thing as a product. In 2023, something shifted. Not in the music. That remained consistent, technically precise, occasionally breathtaking. The shift was in the business. A new name began appearing in the management credits of Karolina's content. New language started showing up in brand partnership disclosures. The structure around the channel, the infrastructure that had been built almost entirely by Dmitry Protsenko from a kitchen table in California, quietly began to reorganize. And nobody announced it. The first sign wasn't an announcement. It was an absence. In early 2023, the upload frequency on Karolina's main YouTube channel dropped. Not dramatically, but noticeably to anyone who had been tracking the channel's rhythm. Where there had been consistent weekly uploads, sometimes twice weekly, there were now gaps. 10 days, 2 weeks, once nearly 3 weeks of silence with no explanation posted to the community tab. For a channel built on algorithmic consistency, that kind of gap doesn't happen by accident. It happens when something behind the scenes is being restructured. Then the content format changed. The videos that returned after those gaps looked different. The production quality stepped up again, this time more significantly than the 2019 to 2020 shift. Color grading that matched professional music video standards. Editing rhythms that felt less like a family operation and more like a mid-sized production company. The thumbnails evolved again, cleaner, more fashion-forward, closer in visual language to what a record label might produce for a young adult artist than what a family YouTube channel typically generates. Karolina's physical presentation shifted in parallel. The styling in videos from 2023 onward was noticeably more deliberate, more adult in its framing. She was 13, moving toward 14. The content around her was being repositioned, not crudely, but clearly, for a slightly older audience demographic than the one that had followed her since the sidewalk days. These changes don't originate with the performer. A 13-year-old does not independently decide to overhaul their thumbnail strategy and reposition their brand demographic. These are decisions made in conversations that happen off camera between adults about the future commercial direction of the talent. The question of who was now in those conversations is where the public record gets thin. No formal management company has been publicly confirmed in press releases or credible entertainment industry reporting as of the time this was researched. Dmitry Protsenko's name continued to appear in channel credits, but the language in brand partnership disclosures, the legal text that appears in video descriptions when content is sponsored, shifted in structure. The phrasing became more standardized, more legally precise. That kind of language shift typically indicates that someone with professional entertainment law experience entered the picture. Whether that person or company was there to protect Karolina, to ensure proper Coogan law compliance, fair contract terms, and age-appropriate working conditions, or whether they were there primarily to scale the revenue operation more efficiently, is a question the public record cannot definitively answer. Both interpretations are legitimate. The entertainment industry contains both kinds of management. Some professionals enter a young performer's life and fundamentally advocate for that performer's long-term well-being over short-term revenue. Others enter and optimize the machine. The difference is not always visible from the outside. Sometimes it isn't visible to the performer themselves until years later. What is visible is this. By late 2023, Karolina Protsenko was performing at a different tier of venue. Corporate events with disclosed fees that, based on comparable talent booking rates, would suggest five-figure performance fees per appearance. Brand alignments with companies that don't partner with family channels, they partner with artists. The commercial positioning had moved her out of the child prodigy category and was actively constructing something new around her. She was 14 years old. And then something happened that cut through all of it. The managed content, the controlled narrative, the restructured business apparatus. Karolina said something unscripted, not in an interview, not in a carefully edited video, in the comment section of her own upload. A single reply to a viewer who had asked her directly, not about music, not about touring, but about whether she was okay. The reply stayed visible for less than 48 hours. Then it was gone. The industry calls it the transition. It's the moment when the child performer has to become something else, because the thing they were can't sustain itself. A 7-year-old prodigy is a phenomenon. A 14-year-old prodigy is expected. A 20-year-old who is still being marketed as a prodigy is a warning sign. The window is narrow. The pressure to evolve is enormous. And the people who manage that evolution or fail to determine almost everything about what comes next. For Karolina, the visible signs of that transition began emerging clearly in 2024. The musical direction shifted first. Where earlier content leaned heavily on recognizable covers, pop songs and film scores arranged for violin, optimized for search volume and shareability, newer uploads began featuring more original compositions and serious classical repertoire. Pieces that don't chase algorithmic trends. Pieces that require genuine artistic commitment to perform credibly. That shift is not a small one. It represents either Karolina asserting her own artistic identity or someone around her making a strategic decision to reposition her toward a more serious, longer-lasting market. Possibly both. The two are not mutually exclusive. The content tone shifted as well. Videos from late 2024 show something that earlier years largely didn't. Karolina speaking at length in her own voice about specific musical choices. Why she selected a particular piece. What a certain passage means to her technically. How she approached a difficult section during practice. These are not managed answers. They require genuine knowledge and genuine opinion. You cannot fake fluency about music theory to an audience that plays instruments. She wasn't faking it. She was, for the first time in years of public content, visibly present in her own narrative. The camera relationship changed too. There's a particular quality to footage of someone who has decided, consciously or not, that they are no longer performing for the lens. They stop angling toward it. They stop waiting for it. In several clips from 2024, Karolina has that quality. She's talking to the person behind the camera, not to the audience behind the person. It's a subtle shift, but it's the kind of shift that doesn't happen by accident. None of this means the questions raised by her story have been answered. The Coogan compliance question remains publicly unresolved. The collaborators who vanished never reappeared. The deleted comment was never addressed. The structure built around her, the management layer, the revenue streams, the brand infrastructure, is still operating. But Karolina Protsenko is not a tragedy. She is not a cautionary tale assembled for someone else's lesson. She is a young woman who grew up inside a machine that was built around her talent before she was old enough to understand what a machine was. And by the evidence that is currently visible, the artistic choices, the unscripted moments, the growing presence in her own story, she is beginning carefully and deliberately to decide what comes next on her own terms. We don't know how this ends. The cameras are still on. The channel is still active. She is still performing. The only question that remains, The one that started this entire investigation back on a Santa Monica sidewalk in 2018 is who's holding the camera now, and whether for the first time the answer to that question might be her. Stories like this one don't exist in isolation. Every few years, a child goes viral. The world watches. The machine turns on. And then, slowly, the world moves on to the next one, while the first one is still inside it, still performing, still figuring out who they are beneath everything that was built around them. There is another name, one you already know, a child who went viral younger, grew faster, and whose story took a turn that almost nobody covered honestly. That investigation is the next video on this channel, and the pattern, when you see it laid out in full, is almost identical to this one,